The morning sun hadn't even risen when the senior flight attendant pulled up to Newport Regional Airport in her sleek silver car. She adjusted her perfectly pressed uniform and checked her immaculate makeup in the rearview mirror. With 15 years of experience under her belt, she had mastered the art of looking flawless, even for the earliest flights. Walking through the crew entrance, she carried herself with the confidence of someone who knew exactly where they stood in life. Other flight attendants called her Queen Bee behind her back, not exactly a compliment, but she took it as one. In her mind, the airline industry was all about hierarchy, and she had earned her place at the top. To her, first-class passengers were the only ones worth the extra effort. They paid premium prices, so they deserved premium service. Economy passengers. Well, they got what they paid for, the bare minimum. She perfected the art of the dismissive smile, the kind that made economy passengers think twice before pressing their call buttons. Little did she know that this ordinary Tuesday would turn her perfectly ordered world upside down. The struggling airline she worked for had just been bought by someone new, a young billionaire who'd built his fortune from scratch. He wasn't your typical suit and tie businessman who made decisions from a fancy office. No, he believed in seeing things with his own eyes. That morning, while she was briefing her crew about the usual first-class passengers are our priority protocol, the new owner was sitting in his home office, holding an economy-class ticket. He looked at his reflection in the window, adjusting the worn baseball cap that would help him blend in with regular passengers. His plan? Simple but clever. Fly as a regular economy passenger and see how things really worked on his new airline. He'd heard stories about the different treatment between first-class and economy passengers. Some reviews praised the first-class service, while others complained about being treated like second-class citizens in economy. He needed to know the truth, not from reports or surveys, but from real experience. The owner changed into everyday clothes, just simple jeans and a plain t-shirt. He could have easily bought the most expensive ticket and enjoyed the comfort of first class. Instead, he chose seat 32B, right in the middle of economy class, where he'd get the real passenger experience. What made this even more interesting was the timing. The airline industry was changing, with more people demanding fair treatment regardless of ticket price. Social media had given passengers a voice they never had before. One viral video of poor service could damage an airline's reputation overnight. Back at the airport, the senior flight attendant was going through her pre-flight checklist, making sure the premium champagne was perfectly chilled for first class. She had no idea that her usual routine was about to become the most important flight of her career. The morning buzzed with activity as passengers began to arrive. The flight attendant watched from her crew position, categorizing people as they walked by: first class, extra attention, economy, basic service. She believed this system worked perfectly. Why fix something that wasn't broken? As the owner waited in the boarding line with his economy ticket, he watched how differently the staff treated passengers depending on which line they stood in. The contrast was obvious: warm smiles and personal greetings for first class, quick nods and hurried directions for everyone else. What would happen when these two worlds collided? The flight attendant who believed in strict class division and the airline owner who believed every passenger deserved respect were about to cross paths. Neither knew it yet, but this flight would change not just their perspectives, but the entire airline's future. The boarding process was in full swing when the owner stepped onto his own airplane as just another economy passenger. The familiar smell of fresh coffee and cleaning supplies filled the air, but everything else felt different from this new perspective. He adjusted his baseball cap and moved with the slow shuffling line of passengers making their way down the narrow aisle. Up in first class, the senior flight attendant was in her element, helping a well-known TV host store his expensive leather bag in the overhead compartment. Her smile was bright and genuine as she offered him a selection of pre-flight drinks. "Just let me know if you need anything else," she said warmly, touching his shoulder with a practiced gesture of familiarity. The contrast became crystal clear as the owner reached row 32. He could hear the same flight attendant's voice change completely when addressing economy passengers. Short, clipped responses replaced the warm chatter from moments before. It was like watching an actor switch roles mid-performance. An elderly woman a few rows ahead caught his attention. She was struggling to lift her small wheeled suitcase, but the senior flight attendant walked right past her, pretending to be busy with something in her folder. A younger passenger finally stepped in to help, earning a grateful smile from the elderly woman. The owner settled into his middle seat, sandwiched between a tired-looking business traveler and a mother trying to keep her young child entertained. He pulled out his phone, appearing to play a game while actually taking notes about everything he observed. The mother next to him was doing her best to keep her little one quiet, but the child was getting fussy from all the waiting. When the senior flight attendant passed by, the mother politely asked if she could have some water for her child's medicine. "You'll have to wait for the drink service to begin," came the curt reply, without even a glance at the child. Yet just minutes later, the same attendant rushed to first class with fresh glasses of water when someone merely looked thirsty. The owner raised his hand to get her attention as she passed by again. "Excuse me," he said politely, "I noticed the bathroom sign is still showing occupied, but no one's been in there for a while. Could you check if it's stuck?" It was a legitimate issue he'd spotted, something that could help all the passengers. She barely slowed down. "We're busy with boarding right now," she replied, not even making eye contact. "If it's an emergency, you can use the bathroom at the back of the plane." Her tone made it clear that his concern wasn't worth her time. Meanwhile, up in first class, a minor celebrity was complaining about the reading light not being bright enough. The flight attendant's transformation was instant. She spent nearly 10 minutes trying different solutions and apologizing profusely for the inconvenience. As the flight prepared for takeoff, the owner watched other crew members following the senior flight attendant's lead. Some seemed uncomfortable with the obvious double standard, but followed it anyway. A younger flight attendant tried to be equally friendly to all passengers, but got a sharp look from her senior colleague. The plane began to move, and the owner noticed something interesting. Despite the cold service, economy passengers were helping each other, sharing magazines, helping with bags, and swapping seats so families could sit together. There was a sense of community that had developed almost in spite of the treatment they received. He pulled out his notebook, jotting down ideas. This wasn't just about one flight attendant's behavior anymore. It was about an entire culture that had developed, where the price of your ticket determined your worth as a person. As the plane took off, he knew this flight would lead to changes nobody on board could imagine. The senior flight attendant made her final checks, satisfied that everything was perfect in first class. She had no idea that her ordinary Tuesday flight was about to become anything but ordinary. In fact, the real story was just beginning, and her next interaction with a quiet passenger in 32B would start a chain of events that would reshape everything she thought she knew about her job. As the plane reached cruising altitude, the real drama of the flight began to unfold. The owner watched from his economy seat as the senior flight attendant orchestrated what she probably thought was perfect service, at least for the privileged few in first class. Her movements were like a well-rehearsed dance, but one that only played for certain audience members. The drink cart started its journey from first class, where passengers were offered a selection of premium beverages in real glasses. By the time it reached economy, those same drinks came in plastic cups, served with barely a glance. The owner noticed how other flight attendants had started copying their seniors' behavior. A clear sign that this wasn't just one person's attitude, but a culture that had taken root. He pulled out his notebook again, writing down his observations. The mother next to him was still trying to keep her child calm. But without the water she'd asked for earlier, the child's medicine remained untaken. The businesswoman on his other side hadn't even bothered to press her call button, having already learned it would likely be ignored. A young flight attendant, newer to the job, seemed torn between following her training and following her senior's example. When an economy passenger asked about allergen information for the snacks, she started to help, but was quickly pulled aside by the senior attendant. "Don't spend too much time back here," the senior attendant whispered, loud enough for the owner to hear. "First class needs their meal orders taken." The tension in the cabin grew when an elderly man in economy started showing signs of distress. He was breathing heavily and looking pale. His seatmate pressed the call button repeatedly, but the senior flight attendant merely glanced back before delegating the task to the youngest crew member. "You handle it," she said, carrying a fresh bottle of champagne toward first class. "I have important passengers waiting." The owner watched as the junior attendant, despite her inexperience, handled the situation professionally. She brought the elderly man water, checked his symptoms, and made sure he was comfortable. Other passengers pitched in too. A nurse from a few rows back offered help. Someone else shared their fan, showing how people could come together in difficult moments. Throughout all this, the senior flight attendant remained focused on her first-class duties, seemingly oblivious to the fact that every passenger's comfort mattered. The owner noticed her checking her watch frequently, probably counting down to landing when she could escape what she clearly saw as the burden of economy class. His constant note-taking was starting to draw attention. The senior flight attendant had noticed him writing after each interaction, and her suspicious glances grew more frequent. During a quiet moment, he overheard her discussing him with another crew member. "He must be from corporate," she whispered. "Or worse, one of those travel reviewers who love to complain about everything." The atmosphere grew more tense when mild turbulence hit the plane. As the seatbelt signs came on, the senior flight attendant rushed to secure the first-class cabin, making sure everyone had what they needed before the service pause. Meanwhile, economy passengers had to scramble to save their drinks from spilling, with no help in sight. This was the moment the owner decided to start talking with other passengers around him. Their stories painted a clear picture. This wasn't a one-time occurrence. Many were frequent flyers who had noticed the service gap growing wider over the years. Some had even started choosing other airlines when they could, tired of feeling like second-class citizens. What struck him most was how the passengers had formed their own support system. They helped each other with bags, shared snacks, and kept an eye on each other's belongings during bathroom breaks. It was as if they created their own community in response to being overlooked by the crew. The senior flight attendant, noticing these increasing interactions around seat 32B, began to pay more attention to this peculiar passenger who seemed too interested in everything happening around him. Her perfect world of clear boundaries between classes was starting to feel threatened, though she couldn't quite explain why. Little did she know, but her carefully maintained system was about to face its biggest challenge yet. As the flight continued, the seeds of change were already taking root, and the next phase of this journey would shake her professional world to its core. The captain's voice crackled over the intercom, warning of upcoming turbulence. As the plane began to shake, the owner noticed how this moment of uncertainty seemed to level the playing field. Turbulence didn't care what anyone paid for their ticket. The senior flight attendant hurried to secure loose items in the first-class cabin, her movements becoming more rushed as the turbulence increased. "Please remain in your seats," she announced, though her concerned tone seemed directed only toward the front of the plane. In economy, passengers helped each other secure their drinks and belongings. The mother next to the owner finally managed to give her child the needed medicine, thanks to a kind passenger who'd saved their water from the earlier service. These small acts of kindness painted a clear picture of how people naturally came together when official support was lacking. During this forced pause in service, the owner took the opportunity to chat with nearby passengers. A retired teacher shared stories of flying the same route for 20 years, noting how the service had changed. "It didn't used to be like this," she explained quietly. "We were all treated like valued customers, regardless of where we sat." The business traveler on his other side joined the conversation, describing how she often bought economy tickets despite her company offering business class. "I'd rather donate the difference to charity," she explained. But it's tough being treated like you're invisible just because you choose to sit back here. The senior flight attendant noticed these growing conversations around seat 32B. She'd been watching this peculiar passenger for a while now, and his constant note-taking and questions were making her increasingly uneasy. She'd dealt with mystery shoppers and airline reviewers before, but something about this passenger felt different. As she passed by his row, she overheard him asking another crew member about company policies and service standards. Her suspicion turned to concern. In her 15 years of flying, she learned that passengers asking too many questions usually meant trouble. Finally, she couldn't contain her curiosity anymore. During a quieter moment, she approached his seat, her professional smile barely masking her suspicion. "Sir," she said, trying to keep her voice casual, "I couldn't help but notice you're very interested in our operations today. Are you perhaps from corporate?" The owner looked up from his notebook, meeting her gaze steadily. "I'm just a passenger interested in how things work," he replied calmly. But something in his tone made her even more suspicious. She'd seen the pages of notes, the careful observations, the way other crew members had started gravitating toward him during quiet moments. "Are you a journalist?" she pressed, her voice dropping lower. "Because any article or review needs to be officially cleared through our PR department." She was trying to regain control of a situation that felt increasingly out of her hands. The turbulence had created an unexpected opportunity for the truth to surface. Other passengers were now openly sharing their experiences, not just with the owner, but with each other. Stories of missed connections due to ignored questions, of feeling unwelcome in their own paid seats, of choosing this airline only when they had no other choice. The young flight attendant who had helped with the elderly passenger earlier stopped to join the conversation. She shared her perspective too, talking about her training days and how different they were from the actual job. "We were taught that every passenger deserves respect," she said, glancing nervously at her senior colleague. "But sometimes it feels like we've forgotten that." The senior flight attendant stood frozen, listening to these conversations unfold. Her perfectly controlled world was cracking, and she could feel her authority slipping away. The passenger in 32B wasn't just taking notes anymore. He was catalyzing a dialogue that she couldn't control. Little did she know, but her confrontation about his identity was about to backfire in a way she never could have expected. The real revelation was moments away, and it would shake the foundation of everything she thought she knew about her role in the airline industry. The plane had started its initial descent when the senior flight attendant decided to confront the mysterious passenger one final time. She'd been watching him talking to crew members in the galley, and her patience had finally run out. Walking briskly to row 32, she gestured for him to follow her to the back of the plane. "Look," she said in a hushed but firm tone once they reached the galley, "I need to know exactly what you're doing. Are you writing some kind of expose? Because I've worked too hard to have my career damaged by a hit piece." Her usual polished demeanor was cracking, revealing genuine worry beneath. The owner closed his notebook slowly, looking around the small galley space. Other crew members had gathered nearby, curious about the confrontation. The young flight attendant who'd been kind to economy passengers stood closest, worry visible on her face. "You're right about one thing," he said quietly. "This is about your career, but not in the way you think." He reached into his pocket and pulled out his wallet, removing a business card. "I think it's time we had an honest conversation about the future of this airline." The senior flight attendant's hand shook slightly as she took the card. Her eyes widened as she read it, then read it again, the color draining from her face. This can't be real," she stammered, looking from the card to his face and back again. "You're the new owner," he finished simply. "I bought this airline 3 weeks ago." His voice remained gentle, but carried undeniable authority. The other crew members gasped, a few of them instinctively stepping back. The senior flight attendant gripped the counter behind her for support. "But you've been sitting in economy all this time, taking notes, watching us." The realization of every interaction, every dismissive comment, every ignored request crashed over her like a wave. I believe the only way to understand a business is to experience it as a customer, he explained, taking his baseball cap off. I've spent this flight watching two very different types of service play out. Up front, where you thought the important people were sitting, you provided exceptional attention. But back here, he gestured to the economy cabin. The young flight attendant stepped forward. Sir, I tried to treat everyone equally. I really did, she said, her voice trembling slightly. But I was told to focus on first class. The owner nodded encouragingly. I noticed. And you did the right thing helping that elderly passenger earlier, despite being told not to spend time in economy. He turned back to the senior flight attendant. That's actually the kind of service I want to see throughout this airline. Other crew members were whispering now, the news spreading quietly through the plane. The senior flight attendant's perfectly maintained professional mask had completely crumbled. Are you going to fire me? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The owner considered this for a moment. I don't believe in throwing people away, he said finally. I believe in giving them chances to learn and grow. The question is, are you willing to learn a different way of doing things? Tears welled up in her eyes as 15 years of certainty about her job crumbled around her. The hierarchy she'd so carefully maintained, the system she believed in completely, suddenly seemed meaningless. She looked out at the economy cabin, seeing it with new eyes, not as a space to endure, but as a cabin full of people who had trusted their journey to her care. I never thought about it from their perspective, she admitted, her voice cracking. I just assumed that's how things were supposed to be. The plane hit a small pocket of turbulence, making everyone sway slightly. It felt symbolic somehow, the old way of doing things being shaken up, making room for something new. Well, the owner said, picking up his notebook, maybe it's time to think about things differently. He opened the notebook, showing her pages of observations, not just criticisms, but also potential solutions, ideas for improvement, and notes about positive moments he witnessed. The plane was just 30 minutes from landing when the owner gathered the entire crew in the rear galley. The senior flight attendant stood slightly apart from the others, still processing the shocking revelation. Her usually perfect uniform felt uncomfortably tight, as if it too was part of a role she'd been playing for too long. I'm not here to punish anyone, the owner began, his voice calm but firm. I'm here to make this airline better for everyone, our passengers and our crew. He pulled out his notebook again, flipping through the pages of observations he'd made during the flight. What I've seen today shows me two things. First, we have crew members who know how to provide excellent service. He nodded toward the young flight attendant who'd helped the elderly passenger. And second, we have a system that somehow convinced good people that some passengers deserve better treatment than others. The senior flight attendant found her voice, though it trembled slightly. What happens now? The other crew members leaned in, equally anxious about their futures. The owner pulled an envelope from his jacket pocket. I'm offering you a choice, he said, looking directly at the senior flight attendant. Behind door number 1 is a standard resignation package. You can walk away today with 3 months' salary and a clean record. The galley fell silent. Even the constant hum of the engines seemed muted as everyone waited to hear about door number 2. Or, he continued, you can be part of something new. I'm creating a special training program to transform our airline's service culture. For 3 months, you'll work exclusively in economy class, learning to see things from a different perspective. You'll also help train other crew members in providing excellent service to every passenger, regardless of their ticket class. The young flight attendant's eyes lit up. Will we all get a chance to be part of this program? The owner nodded. Everyone who wants to be part of the change is welcome. But, he turned back to the senior flight attendant, I want you to lead it. Your experience could be valuable, especially once you've seen both sides of the story. The senior flight attendant blinked in surprise. Lead it? But I'm the one who treated economy passengers poorly. Why would you trust me with that? Because sometimes the best teachers are the ones who've learned the hardest lessons themselves, he replied. You know every detail of premium service. Imagine using those skills to make every passenger feel valued, not just the ones in first class. The plane hit a patch of turbulence, making everyone grab for support. It felt like a physical reminder of how their world had been shaken up today. The training won't be easy, the owner continued once the plane steadied. You'll start from scratch. Learn every economy seat position. Understand the unique challenges passengers face back here. You'll work with families traveling with children, elderly passengers who need extra time, business travelers trying to work in limited space. Other crew members started nodding, some even smiling as they imagined the possibilities. The senior flight attendant looked out at the economy cabin, seeing it differently now, not as a burden to endure, but as an opportunity to prove herself in a new way. And here's the most important part, the owner added. You'll be mentored by crew members who already understand this. Like our young colleague here, who didn't let artificial barriers stop her from helping passengers today. The senior flight attendant took a deep breath. 15 years of habits and assumptions weighed heavily on her shoulders. But so did the realization of how many passengers she'd dismissed, how many opportunities to make someone's journey better she'd ignored. The captain's voice came over the intercom, announcing their final descent. It was time for a decision. Stick with the old way of doing things and walk away, or embrace a completely new approach to her career. She looked at the owner, then at her fellow crew members. The choice she made in the next few moments wouldn't just affect her future. It would influence how thousands of future passengers would experience their flights. 1 year had passed since that life-changing flight. The airport buzzed with its usual morning energy as the former senior flight attendant walked through the terminal. Her uniform was different now, no longer the traditional flight attendant outfit, but a smart business suit with a training coordinator badge. She paused at a large window overlooking the runway, remembering the day she'd chosen to accept the owner's challenge. That decision had turned out to be the best one of her career, though the journey hadn't been easy. Those first 3 months in economy class had opened her eyes in ways she never expected. She'd learned to serve drinks in turbulence while making sure a mother could safely feed her baby. She'd discovered how to help elderly passengers with their bags without making them feel helpless. Most importantly, she learned that every seat on the plane held a human story. Today was special, the first graduation ceremony for the airline's new service training program, which she now headed. Looking around the training room, she saw 40 faces, each representing a different airline role. Flight attendants, gate agents, even baggage handlers. All were here to learn the new way of doing things. A year ago, she began, her voice carrying the warmth she'd learned to share with all passengers. I thought I knew everything about airline service. I was wrong. She shared the story of that fateful flight, not hiding her past mistakes, but using them to show how people could change. The owner sat quietly in the back of the room, dressed casually just like that day. He watched as she explained the program's core principle. Every passenger who steps onto our planes is putting their trust in us. The price of their ticket doesn't change the value of that trust. She clicked to the next slide, showing customer satisfaction scores. The transformation was clear. Complaints had dropped by 60%, while compliments had tripled. But the most surprising change had come from an unexpected place. Employee satisfaction had soared. When we stopped dividing passengers into categories, she explained, we also stopped dividing ourselves. Now our crew members work as one team, supporting each other to help everyone. The young flight attendant who'd helped the elderly passenger that day was now her assistant trainer. Together, they'd created practical exercises that helped staff understand different passenger needs. They'd even built a mock airplane cabin where trainees spent time sitting in economy seats, experiencing what their passengers felt. Stories of the airline's transformation had spread. Other airlines had started sending their staff to learn. The owner's unconventional approach had turned into an industry-leading example of how to treat passengers right. As she handed out graduation certificates, she remembered her own moment of choice in that airplane galley a year ago. Each of these graduates would go back to their jobs with the power to make someone's journey better, regardless of their seat number. The ceremony ended with a surprise. The elderly passenger from that original flight, the one who'd needed help with his medical issue, walked in. He'd become a regular customer and unofficial advisor to the training program, sharing his experiences to help staff understand passenger perspectives. This isn't just about making our airline better, she concluded, looking at the proud faces before her. It's about remembering that behind every ticket, every seat number, and every request is a human being who deserves our best. The owner finally stood, joining her at the front. A year ago, he said, "I sat in seat 32B hoping to understand our airline better. What I found was someone brave enough to admit they could learn and grow." He turned to address the graduates. "Now it's your turn to take these lessons and create experiences that make every passenger feel valued." As the room filled with applause, she looked out the window at a plane taking off. Somewhere on that flight, crew members were already putting these new principles into practice. The old way of thinking about first class and economy had been replaced by a simple truth: every passenger deserved to be treated with dignity and respect. The story of the airline owner in disguise had become more than just a tale of uncovering problems. It had turned into a lesson about how change was possible when people were given the chance to see things differently. Most importantly, it showed that sometimes the biggest transformations start with a simple choice to learn and grow.